They built a bridge across my land without ever saying a word to me, and the first time I saw it, it was already finished, polished, like it had always belonged there, like I was the only one who didn't get the memo. And the craziest part wasn't even the bridge, it was the fact that a week later they planned a grand opening. Like this whole thing was a gift to the neighborhood, not something quietly taken from someone who actually owned the ground beneath it. I didn't say anything at first, not because I didn't notice, but because I wanted to understand how something like that even happens, how an entire group of people can just decide that a boundary doesn't matter anymore. My property sits along the edge of a narrow ravine just outside a town called Ashgrove Ridge, the kind of place that used to be nothing but scattered farmland and tree lines until developers started carving it into neat rows of houses with names like Cedar View and Willow Bend, even though half the trees had been cleared to make room for driveways. My land was one of the few pieces that never got touched, partly because the terrain drops sharply into this rocky cut that runs like a scar through the middle of the area, and partly because I never had any reason to sell. I liked the quiet, the way the wind moves differently down there, the way the town feels a little farther away than it actually is. That ravine, it wasn't just scenery, it was a natural divider. On one side, the newer development with its sidewalks and identical mailboxes, and on the other side, older properties like mine, spaced out, a little rougher around the edges. There was never a crossing. If you lived in Cedar View and wanted to get to the grocery store on the other side, you had to drive the long way around. It added maybe 10 minutes, sometimes 15 if traffic backed up near the main road. People complained about it, sure, but it was one of those things everyone just accepted because that's how the land was shaped. At least, that's what I thought. I travel a lot for work, nothing glamorous, just contract jobs that take me out of town for a couple weeks at a time, and during one of those stretches, while I was busy dealing with deadlines and cheap motel coffee, something started happening back home. Equipment showed up first, from what I later pieced together. Trucks, materials, crews moving in and out during the day. And nobody called me. Not a letter, not a notice taped to a post, nothing slipped under the door. By the time I got back, it was already done. I remember walking out toward the ravine that afternoon, just to clear my head after the drive, and I noticed right away something looked off. The trees along the edge had been trimmed back, the ground leveled in spots where it used to be uneven. And then I saw it. A bridge, stretching clean across the gap, like it had been there for years. Wood planks, steel supports, railings on both sides. Even these small decorative lantern posts spaced along the entrance like someone had thought about aesthetics, not just function. I just stood there for a while, hands on my hips, staring at it, trying to catch up to what my eyes were telling me. Because it didn't look temporary. This wasn't some makeshift shortcut people threw together. It was deliberate, engineered, funded, and it was sitting right on my land. I walked the length of it slowly, listening to how the boards creaked under my boots, looking at where the supports had been anchored into the ground. They hadn't just crossed the ravine, they had built directly into both sides, and one of those sides was mine. No question about it. I knew my boundaries down to the last fence post, even the ones that had fallen years ago. My grandfather used to walk that line with me when I was a kid, pointing things out like it mattered, like land wasn't just something you owned, it was something you understood. So I went back inside, pulled out the old documents, then checked the county records online just to be sure nothing had changed while I was gone. Ownership was still mine. No easements filed, no access rights granted, no agreements recorded. Legally speaking, that bridge shouldn't have existed. That's when it stopped being confusing and started becoming interesting. Because mistakes happen, sure. Miscommunication, bad surveys, assumptions. But this didn't feel like a mistake. This felt like someone had made a decision and just hoped I wouldn't push back. I didn't call anyone that day, didn't send an email, didn't knock on doors, didn't even mention it to my neighbor Carl, who notices everything and usually has an opinion ready before you finish your sentence. Instead, I waited, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to see what they were going to do next. And they didn't disappoint. A few days later, signs started going up near the entrances of the development. Bright, cheerful things with bold lettering announcing the Ashgrove Scenic Walkway grand opening scheduled for the following weekend. There were balloons tied to posts, little flags marking the path leading toward the bridge, even a temporary arch set up like they were unveiling something important. I remember standing at the edge of my property one evening, watching a couple of workers adjust one of those signs, And I had this strange moment where it almost felt like I was the outsider. Like somehow the story had already been written, and I was just a detail nobody bothered to include. That feeling didn't last long, because the more I watched, the clearer it became. They weren't asking. They weren't checking. They had already decided that this bridge was part of their community now, and by extension, my land was too. That's when I started planning. Not anything dramatic, not the kind of thing you'd regret later. Just something simple, something direct, something that would remind everyone exactly where that line still was. The morning of the grand opening, I woke up earlier than usual. The air had that quiet stillness before an event, like the world was holding its breath. I loaded a few things into the back of my truck, tools, materials I'd picked up the day before, and drove down to the ravine. From a distance, everything looked ready. Decorations were in place, the bridge clean and inviting, like it was waiting for its first official crossing. You wouldn't have known anything was wrong. Up close, that was about to change. I parked a little ways off so I wouldn't draw attention, killed the engine, and just sat there for a second with my hands resting on the steering wheel, looking out at that bridge like it was some kind of stage set, like all it needed was a crowd and a ribbon to become officially real. And I remember thinking, this is the moment right here. This is where it either becomes theirs, or it stays mine. I stepped out, grabbed what I needed from the truck, and walked down toward the ravine. The ground was still a little damp from rain the night before, that soft crunch under your boots that carries farther than you expect when everything else is quiet. No one else was there yet, just the decorations shifting slightly in the breeze, a couple of folding tables set up near the entrance on the other side, probably for refreshments or speeches or whatever they had planned. They really went all out. I started on my side first, measured the distance twice, just out of habit, then set the posts deep enough that they weren't going anywhere. I wasn't rushing, but I wasn't dragging it out either. There's a certain kind of focus that comes when you know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. No second guessing, no overthinking. Just step by step. By the time the first car pulled up in the distance, I had already secured the gate frame. Solid metal, not decorative, not something you could just step around. This wasn't about making a statement with style. It was about making a point that couldn't be ignored. I locked it, tested it once, then twice, listening for that clean, final click. Then I walked across the bridge. I'll admit, that part felt strange. Not because I wasn't allowed to be there, but because it already felt like I was walking through something that didn't belong to me anymore, even though it absolutely did. That's the thing about perception. Once enough people believe something is theirs, it starts to feel that way, even before it's true. On the other side, I repeated the process. Same measurements, same depth, same kind of barrier. When I finished, the bridge was still there, untouched structurally, still as clean and inviting as before, but now it was sealed at both ends. Complete, but unusable. Exactly the way I wanted it. The last thing I did was attach a single notice to the gate facing the main path. Nothing aggressive, nothing emotional. Just clear, direct language. Private property. No public access. Then I stepped back and looked at it all together. From far enough away, it still looked perfect. You could stand at the top of the path and see the bridge stretching across the ravine, framed by trees, decorated like it was ready for a postcard. But the closer you got, the more obvious it became something wasn't right. I gathered my tools, walked back to the truck, and parked myself where I could see the entrance without being in the way. It didn't take long. First came a couple of early walkers, the kind of people who show up ahead of events just to be part of it from the beginning. They slowed down as they approached the gate, one of them leaning in to read the notice, the other trying the handle like maybe it wasn't actually locked. I could see the confusion on their faces even from where I was sitting. Then more people started arriving. Families, kids, a few older couples, and eventually the organizers. You could spot them easily, moving with purpose, carrying clipboards, talking a little louder than everyone else, like they were trying to keep control of something that was already slipping. One of them, a guy in his 40s wearing a pressed button-down and that kind of smile people practice in mirrors, walked straight up to the gate, read the sign, and then looked around like he expected someone to jump out and explain it. That's when I got out of the truck. I didn't rush over, just walked at a steady pace, hands relaxed, like this was any other morning. A few people noticed me approaching, conversations dipping just slightly as attention shifted. The guy turned toward me as I got closer. "Hey," he said, polite at first, but already carrying an edge underneath. Do you know anything about this? I nodded once. Yeah, I put it up. There was a pause, not long, but enough for the tone to change. I'm sorry, you what? I installed the gates, I said, same calm voice. This section of land is mine. He blinked, like he needed a second to process that, then let out a short breath that almost turned into a laugh. Okay. All right. There must be some misunderstanding, he said, glancing back at the bridge like it could confirm his version of reality. This walkway was approved months ago. We've been working with the development team. Not with me. I cut in, not raising my voice, just keeping it level. That smile slipped a little. Well, the property lines were surveyed, he said, a bit firmer now. Everything was cleared before construction started. I checked the records, I replied. No easement, no agreement, no permission granted. Now people were really paying attention. Conversations around us had quieted down, that low murmur of a crowd trying not to stare while absolutely staring. Another woman stepped in beside him, holding a folder, flipping it open like the papers inside might fix this if she just found the right page. This bridge connects two public sections of the neighborhood, she said, more assertive. It's intended for community access. And it crosses private land, I said, which requires permission. There was again that pause. Longer this time. The man exhaled slowly, running a hand along his jaw like he was trying to stay composed. Look, he said, lowering his voice just a bit, stepping closer to me. A lot of time and money went into this. The community is expecting to use it starting today. I nodded slightly. I can see that. So let's not make this bigger than it needs to be, he continued, that practiced tone coming back, but tighter now. If there's paperwork that needs to be finalized, we can handle that after the event. For now, why don't you open the gate, and we'll sort the details out properly. I couldn't help it. I smiled a little at that. See, that's the part that doesn't work for me, I said. You don't get to build first and ask later. That's not how this goes. His expression hardened. You're holding up a public event. No, I said. I'm protecting private property. For a second, neither of us said anything. You could feel the shift, that invisible line where this stopped being a misunderstanding and became a standoff. Behind him, someone tried the other gate, same result. Locked. A kid asked his mom why they couldn't go across. She didn't answer right away. The woman with the folder closed it a little too sharply. This is going to cause problems, she said. I nodded again. It already did. For a few seconds after that, nobody really knew what to do, and that was the strangest part of the whole thing. Not the argument, not even the bridge itself, but that moment where everything they had planned just kind of stalled out in midair. You could feel it in the crowd, that shift from excitement to uncertainty, people looking at each other like maybe someone else had the answer. The guy in the button-down straightened up, like he was trying to reset the situation back into something he could manage. All right, he said, louder this time so others could hear. We're going to take a moment here and figure this out. Which really meant they had no idea what to do. A few people started drifting off to the sides, some whispering, some pulling out their phones. One older man walked up close to the gate again, squinting at the sign like maybe the words would change if he stared long enough. A couple of teenagers laughed awkwardly and turned back toward the path they came from. And me? I just stood there, hands in my pockets, not angry, not smug, just steady. Because this wasn't about making a scene. It was about making something clear. The man stepped back toward me again, this time without the practiced smile. What do you want? He asked, more direct now. There it was, finally. I tilted my head slightly. That's the first right question you've asked all morning. He didn't like that. We're trying to do something good for this community, he said, frustration starting to creep in. This walkway connects families, it improves access, it increases property value for everyone in the area. Except the person you built it on, I said. That landed. He exhaled hard through his nose. So what? You're just going to keep it closed? After everything that's been put into it? I'm going to keep it closed, I said, until everything that should have been done first actually gets done. The woman beside him crossed her arms. You could have said something earlier. I let out a quiet breath at that. Not annoyed, just a little amazed. You could have asked earlier. That one didn't need any extra weight. It just sat there between us. Behind them, the crowd had thinned out a bit. Not completely, but enough that the energy was gone. No ribbon cutting, no applause, no official moment. Just a bridge no one could use. Eventually, the man nodded once, like he was accepting something he didn't have a choice about. "This isn't over," he said. I gave a small shrug. "It doesn't have to be a problem. It just has to be handled the right way." He held my gaze for a second longer, then turned and walked off, already pulling his phone out, already shifting into whatever came next for him. And just like that, the grand opening ended before it ever really started. Over the next few days, things got interesting. At first, it was quiet. A couple of emails came through from the development office, polite but clearly urgent, asking to discuss access solutions. Then a letter from a legal team, not aggressive, but carefully worded in that way lawyers have, where every sentence feels like it's leaning in a direction without quite stepping over the line. I responded the same way I had acted, calm, direct, documented. I sent copies of property records, survey maps, timestamps. Everything clear, everything simple. Not emotional, not dramatic. Just facts. And that's when the tone started to change. Because once it became clear that I wasn't guessing, that I knew exactly where the boundaries were and exactly what rights were attached to them, the conversation shifted from assumption to negotiation. They stopped talking about what they had built and started talking about what they needed. Access. That was the word that kept coming up. They needed access to make the bridge functional. Without it, the whole thing was just sitting there. A finished project with no purpose. A connection that didn't connect anything. And suddenly, the person they never contacted became the one they had to sit down with. We met a week later in a small office just off the main road. Nothing fancy. A table, a few chairs, a window that looked out over a parking lot. The same man was there, along with the woman from before, and someone new, older, quieter, the kind of person who didn't say much but didn't need to. This time, there were no speeches. They laid everything out. Proposals, terms, timelines. They talked about shared benefits, liability coverage, maintenance responsibilities. Real conversations. The kind that should have happened before a single plank was laid down. I listened, asked a few questions, took my time, because now we were doing it properly. I won't get into every detail of what we agreed on, but I will say this: the final arrangement looked very different from what they had originally assumed. Access was granted, eventually, but not freely and not without structure. Boundaries were marked, responsibilities defined, and for the first time since that bridge appeared, everything was actually legitimate. The gates came down after that, not because I changed my mind, but because the situation changed. And that's an important difference. The bridge is still there today. Same wood, same steel, same clean lines stretching across that ravine like it always belonged. People use it now, every day. Kids run across it, couples walk it in the evenings, neighbors pass each other in the middle and stop to talk like it's always been part of their routine. And sometimes I'll stand off to the side and watch that for a minute. Not with regret, not even with pride, really, just with understanding. Because here's the thing most people don't realize: building something across a boundary doesn't make it yours. It just means you were willing to ignore the line long enough to convince yourself it didn't matter, until someone reminds you that it does. And maybe that's the part people argue about when they hear this story. Some think I should have just let it go, that it helped the community, that it wasn't worth the conflict. Others think I did exactly what needed to be done, that if you don't stand your ground once, you don't really have ground to stand on anymore. I don't know. All I know is they built first, assuming permission would follow. And for a little while, they almost got away with it. So now I'm curious, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have opened the gate and dealt with it later? Or closed it like I did and forced the conversation to happen the hard way? Let me know in the comments, because I've heard both sides, and honestly, I still think about it sometimes.